year 1880 had bled the color from the land, leaving it the hue of rust and bone. The town of Redemption was a clot in the wound, a place carved from the red dust and raw timber of the unforgiving West. Its main street was a treacherous river of mud after the last rain, now baked and cracked under a sun that offered heat without warmth. The wind was a constant, hot breath that carried the grit of the plains into every corner, coating the unpainted storefronts and settling in the lines of men's faces. Those faces were hard, etched with suspicion and a weariness that came from fighting the land, the heat, and each other. In Redemption, the law was a flimsy thing, a suggestion easily bent and reshaped in the hands of the men who ran the saloon, the silver mine, and the town council, which were, more often than not, the same hands. It was a man's world, and a woman was worth only what she could provide: comfort, labor, or a son. It was into this world that Clara was returned, like a faulty piece of mail. The stagecoach rumbled to a stop before the dusty way station, and she was nudged out by a man whose face she had come to loathe. He was Jebediah, her husband's brother, a man with a sour disposition and mean, narrow eyes. He didn't touch her gently. He shoved her forward, her worn calico dress catching on the splintered door frame. "Here she is," Jebediah announced to the station master, a portly man named Silas who was wiping a grimy counter. "Returned. No good." The words were a physical blow. Clara flinched, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Though the heat was suffocating, she kept her eyes fixed on the floorboards, unable to meet the curious, contemptuous stares of the half-dozen men loitering inside. She could feel their judgment like a brand on her skin. She had failed in the singular duty of a wife. In 2 years of marriage, her womb had remained barren, an empty, useless vessel. Her husband's family, who had paid a handsome price for a healthy, child-bearing bride, had grown first impatient, then cruel. They called her a curse, a burden, a mouth to feed with no return. "What do you mean, no good?" Silas asked, his voice laced with a greasy sort of interest. "Barren." Jebediah spat the word like poison. "Useless to us now. We're done with her. She's your problem." He threw a small, worn leather pouch on the counter. It landed with a pathetic clink. "That's for your trouble. Do what you will with her." Clara's blood ran cold. Do what you will with her. The phrase echoed the finality of a death sentence. She was no longer a person. She was an object, a piece of property being discarded. She risked a glance at the men. Their eyes weren't just curious anymore. They were calculating, predatory. One of them, a lanky prospector with a stained beard, sidled up to Jebediah. "There's always a place for a young woman up at the silver camp," he drawled, a yellow-toothed grin spreading across his face. "The boys at Sullivan's place pay good money for a fresh face. She's pretty enough." Sullivan's. Clara had heard whispers of the place. It wasn't a saloon. It was a long, low building where women's bodies were bought and sold for the pleasure of minors. A wave of nausea and sheer animal terror washed over her. Her hands trembled. Her breath caught in her throat. This could not be her end. Not this. Panic, sharp and absolute, seized her, while Jebediah and Silas began to haggle over her fate as if she were a lame horse. Clara saw her chance. The door was open. The street, for all its dangers, represented freedom. She bolted. She didn't get far. The sudden movement caught the men by surprise, but only for a second. A roar of anger and derisive laughter followed her as she stumbled out into the blinding sunlight. Her worn-out boots slipped in the thick, grooved mud of the street. She scrambled for purchase, her lungs burning, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. A hand caught the back of her dress, the fabric ripping. She was spun around, and a heavy palm struck her across the face. The world exploded in a flash of white pain. She fell hard, landing on her hands and knees in the filth of the street. The foul-smelling mud oozed through her dress, cold and humiliating against her skin. She looked up, dazed. into Jebediah's furious face. "Stupid girl, you'll do as you're told," he snarled, raising his hand again. "That's enough." The voice was low and steady, carrying an authority that cut through Jebediah's anger. It came from a woman standing just a few feet away. She was of middle age, her face weathered by the sun and marked by a quiet sorrow. But her eyes were clear and direct. Her hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back in a severe bun. She was dressed plainly in a dark, durable skirt and a man's work shirt, her hands calloused and capable. She held a basket of dried herbs, but her posture was not that of a simple forager. It was rooted, unyielding. Jebediah lowered his hand, scowling. "This ain't your concern, May." The woman, May, stepped forward, placing herself between him and the fallen Clara. "You strike a woman on a public street, in front of God and everyone. I'm making it my concern." The other men shuffled their feet, suddenly looking uncomfortable. May had a reputation in redemption. She was a widow. Her husband had been a decent man, killed years ago in a dispute with miners over a water claim. Since then, she lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of town, keeping to herself, beholden to no one. She was respected, and in a way, she was feared. She did not bend. "She's my family's property," Jebediah insisted, though his voice had lost its bluster. "Not anymore, it seems," May said, her gaze unwavering. "You just declared her no longer of use. Get on your horse, Jebediah, and ride back to that miserable patch of dirt you call a farm. Your business here is done." For a long moment, the two of them were locked in a silent battle of wills. The hot wind swirled dust around their feet. Finally, with a curse under his breath, Jebediah turned on his heel, stomped back to his horse, and galloped away without a backward glance. The other men melted back into the shadows of the way station, their entertainment over. May looked down at Clara, her expression unreadable. "Get up, child." Clara hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to trust no one. But the hand this woman offered was steady, and the alternative was unthinkable. Trembling, she took it. May's grip was strong, pulling her effortlessly to her feet. Without another word, May turned and began walking, expecting Clara to follow. Shamed, terrified, and with nowhere else to go, Clara did. The walk to May's cabin was silent. They passed the last of the town's buildings and followed a faint path that wound up a low hill. The cabin was small and sturdy, built of dark, weathered logs, with a stone chimney and a small, tidy garden fenced off to protect it from foraging animals. Inside, it was cool and dim. It smelled of wood smoke, lavender, and drying sage. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs sat in the center of the single room. A cast-iron stove stood against one wall, and a neatly made bed occupied a corner. It was a sparse existence, but it was clean and orderly. It was a place of peace. Clara stood awkwardly by the door, dripping mud onto the clean-swept floor. May paid it no mind. She set her basket on the table and went to the stove, stirring the contents of a pot that hung over the low embers. The smell of rabbit stew, rich with herbs, filled the small space. "There's water in the basin," May said, her back to Clara. "Clean yourself up. The stew is hot." Clara obeyed numbly. She washed the mud and tears from her face, the cool water a balm on her stinging cheek. She felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were watching herself from a great distance. When she was done, May gestured to the table. A bowl of stew and a piece of dark bread were waiting for her. Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate ravenously, not daring to look up. May sat opposite her, nursing a cup of chicory coffee, watching her with those steady, quiet eyes. She didn't ask Clara her name. She didn't ask where she was from or why she had been cast out. She simply let her be, granting her the dignity of silence. When Clara finished, May took the bowl and pointed to the bed. You're exhausted. Sleep. But where will you— Clara began, her voice a raw whisper. I'll take the floor. Go on now. The command was gentle, but absolute. Too broken to argue. Clara slipped off her muddy boots and lay down on the mattress, which was stuffed with straw, but covered with a clean, soft quilt that smelled of sunshine and soap. She turned her face to the wall, expecting sleep to elude her, but the day's terror and despair had hollowed her out completely. She fell into a heavy, dreamless slumber. When she woke, the cabin was bathed in the deep orange glow of sunset from the small window beside the bed. Clara could see the vast, wild landscape of the west stretching out before her. The hills burned red in the fading light, dotted with the dark green of stubborn scrub brush. High above, a pair of buzzards circled lazily in the immense, empty sky, patient shadows waiting for something to die. The sight should have filled her with despair, but instead, a strange sense of calm settled over her. Here, in this wild, untamed place, her own small tragedy felt insignificant. Her heart was a confused knot of emotions. She was afraid of the future, of this strange, silent woman. She was humiliated, her worth as a woman publicly declared null. But beneath it all, a fragile seed of gratitude was taking root. This woman, this stranger, had asked for nothing, yet had given her shelter, food, and a moment of peace. Later that night, the moon was a silver sliver in the sky. Clara woke to a sound. It was faint, almost lost in the chirping of the crickets and the sigh of the wind. She sat up, listening intently. It was the sound of weeping, soft, choked-off sobs, coming from the main room. Quietly, she slipped out of bed and crept to the edge of the sleeping alcove. By the faint glow of the dying embers in the stove, she could just make out May's silhouette. She was sitting at the table, her back to Clara, her shoulders shaking with a grief so profound it seemed to make the very air in the cabin heavy. Clara froze, a silent witness to a private sorrow. In that moment, she understood. May, the strong, unbending woman who had faced down a street full of angry men, was also carrying a deep and unspoken pain. She, too, was broken, and for the first time since being cast out, Clara felt the faintest glimmer of something she had thought was lost to her forever. A connection. She was not entirely alone. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, a silent language spoken in shared tasks. Clara rose with the first gray light, kindling the fire while May fed the chickens. She learned the heft of the water buckets, the particular way May liked her coffee, the smooth, worn feel of the broom handle in her hands. She swept the floor, kneaded dough for their daily bread, and mended the tears in their worn clothing with small, neat stitches. There was a comfort in the labor, a way to repay the monumental debt she felt she owed. They moved around each other in the small cabin with an unconscious grace, their bodies learning to anticipate the other's presence. It was a life lived on the fringes, a silent, untitled partnership that existed only within the four walls of the log cabin. The world outside those walls, however, had not forgotten them. Their first trip into redemption together was an ordeal of 1,000 tiny cuts. As they walked down the main street, conversations dwindled to whispers, and the whispers followed them like a swarm of biting flies. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the ground, but she could feel the weight of the town's judgment. She saw the women from the church guild, clustered near the mercantile, their mouths tight with disapproval as they watched May, taking in damaged goods. One of them, Mrs. Gable, muttered just loudly enough to be heard, *shameless*. May's back went rigid, but she gave no other sign of having heard. She simply placed a steadying hand on Clara's arm, her grip a silent shield, and guided her into the general store. Inside, the air was thick with the smells of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and open contempt. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, served them with a cold efficiency, his eyes refusing to meet theirs. He counted out May's coins as if they were tainted. Clara felt a burning need to contribute, to ease the burden she had placed on May. Her only real skill was her needlework. Her stitches were fine and even, a craft taught by a mother she could barely remember. One afternoon, summoning a courage she didn't feel, she walked into town alone and approached the dressmaker's shop. The proprietress, a stern woman named Beatrice, looked Clara up and down, her eyes lingering on the simple, mended dress she wore. "I have no work for you," she said, before Clara could even finish her request. "But you haven't seen my sewing," Clara pleaded, holding out a small piece of fabric on which she had embroidered a delicate flower. Beatrice ignored it. "I know who you are," she said, her voice laced with ice. "I know what you are. A wife who couldn't fulfill her duties. A returned woman. Having you in my shop would be bad for business." The dismissal was absolute. A door slammed shut not just on employment, but on any hope of redemption in the eyes of the town. Clara fled, the woman's words branding her with a familiar, searing shame. When she told May what had happened, May's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. She said nothing, but that night, she chopped firewood with a ferocity that made the axe ring like a hammer on an anvil. Weeks bled into a month. The initial heat of summer gave way to the violent temper of the storm season. The sky would bruise to a dark purple in the late afternoon, and the heavens would open up. It was during one such storm, a torrential downpour that turned the world outside their window into a gray, roaring blur, that Clara fell ill. It started with a chill she couldn't shake, and by nightfall, she was burning with fever. She lay on the bed, tossing and turning, lost in a delirious fog. The sound of the rain drumming on the roof became the sound of her husband's family shouting, their accusations echoing in her fevered mind. Barren, useless, curse, she cried out, not for them, but for a memory even older, a name she hadn't spoken in years. "Mama!" Through the haze, she was aware of a constant, calming presence, cool cloths on her forehead, a spoon tipping water against her cracked lips. A voice, low and steady, cutting through the nightmare. "Hush now. Clara, I'm here. Just rest." May worked through the night, her face etched with worry in the flickering lamplight. Clara's dress was soaked with sweat and rain from a brief, delirious attempt to run out into the storm. May knew she had to get her out of the wet clothes, with gentle, practiced hands. She unbuttoned the damp calico. There was no thought in her actions beyond pure, desperate care. She worked quickly, her focus entirely on bringing the fever down. She bathed Clara's frail, trembling body with a cloth dipped in lukewarm water, her touch firm but tender. She whispered her name over and over, a soothing litany against the raging storm inside and out. "Clara, you're safe now. Clara?" Clara finally drifted into a deep, healing sleep. When she awoke, the storm had passed. The early morning light, clean and pale, streamed through the window. The cabin was silent save for the drip of water from the eaves and the soft sound of breathing. She was warm. She was dry. And she was not alone. May had pulled a chair to the bedside and had fallen asleep in it, her head resting on the edge of the mattress, her arm draped protectively over Clara's body. At some point in the night, Clara's hand had found May's, and their fingers were now intertwined. Clara lay perfectly still, studying the woman who had saved her. She saw the exhaustion etched around May's eyes, the silver threads in her dark hair, the strength in the calloused hand that held hers so securely. It was the first time she had ever felt truly safe. She didn't pull her hand away. They stayed like that for a long time, two solitary souls finding anchor in a simple touch, the silence between them no longer empty, but full of unspoken understanding. The fever broke, but it left something new in its wake. The careful distance they had maintained was gone. replaced by a quiet intimacy. A glance held a second too long across the table. A brief, warm touch on the arm as they passed in the cramped space near the hearth. The moments were fleeting, but they began to build, weaving a delicate, invisible thread between them. While kneading dough, their shoulders would brush, and neither would pull away. May would sometimes look up from her mending and find Clara watching her, a soft, curious expression on her face, and a strange warmth would bloom in May's chest, a feeling she had thought long dead. One evening, Clara held up a new shirtwaist she had finished sewing for May from a bolt of soft, gray flannel. "Try it on," she urged, her eyes bright with pride. "I want to see if it fits." May acquiesced, a rare, small smile touching her lips. She pulled the shirt on over her chemise. It fit perfectly. Clara moved behind her, her small hands fussing with the collar, smoothing the fabric over May's strong shoulders. They stood before the small, cracked looking-glass that hung by the door. In its distorted reflection, they were a single portrait framed in the warm, golden glow of the oil lamp. A home, two women, standing so close their breath mingled in the cool evening air. Clara's hands stilled on the collar. She could feel the warmth of May's skin beneath the thin fabric, smell the faint, clean scent of soap and sage that always clung to her. A powerful, unfamiliar wave of emotion washed over her. Gratitude so immense it felt like an ache. Affection so deep it bordered on reverence. It was a feeling that had no name in her world, no place to exist. Acting on an impulse she didn't understand and couldn't control, Clara leaned forward. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pressed her lips to the side of May's neck, in the soft, vulnerable space just below her ear. The kiss was feather-light, tentative, and it shattered the quiet of the room. May went absolutely rigid, a sharp hiss of breath escaping her lips. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then, as if waking from a trance, they sprang apart. The space between them suddenly charged with a terrifying energy. Clara's hand flew to her own mouth, her eyes wide with shock at her own boldness. May stared at her, her face a mask of confusion, alarm, and something else. Something that looked dangerously like fear. The unspoken had been given a voice, a touch, and now it was a wild, frightening thing, loose in the small cabin between them. The kiss left a silence in its wake, a void more vast and oppressive than the quiet that had existed before. The easy rhythm of their shared life shattered. They moved around the small cabin like ghosts, careful not to brush against each other, their eyes refusing to meet. The air, once filled with the comfortable sounds of domesticity, was now thick with unspoken words, with fear and confusion. May retreated into herself. Her trips to town, already infrequent, ceased almost entirely. She spent long hours in her garden, her back a rigid line of defense as she waged a silent, furious war against the weeds. When she spoke, her voice was clipped and distant, stripped of its former warmth. She was a fortress, and Clara, who had found shelter there, was now locked outside its walls. For her part, Clara felt the familiar chill of rejection creeping back into her bones. She threw herself into tasks, her hands never idle. She gathered firewood until her arms ached. She baked bread they didn't need. She scrubbed the floorboards until the wood was pale. Each chore was a question she could not bring herself to ask. She would watch May from the corner of her eye, her heart twisting with a painful mix of hope and dread, waiting for a word, a look, a sign that she had not destroyed the one safe harbor she had ever known. The waiting was a quiet agony. The rift between them might have grown into an impassable chasm had it not been for a discovery May made one scorching afternoon by the creek. She had gone to gather mint when she heard a sound, a faint, whimpering cry almost lost in the drone of the cicadas. Tucked into the roots of a gnarled cottonwood, half hidden by the tall grass, was a child. She was no more than 4 or 5 years old, a little girl with skin the color of rich earth and straight black hair matted with dust and leaves. She was alone, her deerskin dress torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She was clearly of the local tribe, but there was no sign of her people. She was simply left. The child flinched when she saw May, her dark eyes wide with the terror of a cornered animal. May stopped, her heart clenching. She didn't approach directly. Instead, she sat down on the ground a few feet away, making herself small and unthreatening. She began to hum, a low, tuneless melody her own mother had hummed to her decades ago. She held out a canteen, her movements slow and deliberate. After a long, tense silence, the little girl crawled forward and took it, drinking the water with a desperate thirst. When May carried the child back to the cabin, Clara was standing at the door, her face pale with worry. She saw the small, trembling bundle in May's arms and her breath caught. She saw her own abandonment, her own fear, reflected in those wild, dark eyes. Without a word, she stepped aside, holding the door open. A truce had been called. They bathed the little girl, her small body thin and covered in scratches. They fed her broth, which she ate with a quiet, solemn intensity. She did not speak. That night, she slept between them on the bed, a tiny, warm presence that filled the cold space that had grown between them. May named her Lily, for the wild lilies that bloomed resiliently by the creek bed where she was found. Lily's arrival was the stone dropped into the still, stagnant pond of their lives, sending ripples that changed everything. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the need to care for this small, silent creature. They were forced to speak, to coordinate, to work together once more. Clara, could you heat some milk? May, she's finished the bread. They became a unit again, bound by a shared purpose. May, whose hands knew the earth, taught Lily the magic of the garden, showing her how to coax green shoots from the red dust. Clara, whose hands knew the needle, taught her the magic of the thread, guiding her small fingers as she made her first clumsy stitches on a scrap of cloth. Slowly, miraculously, the little girl began to heal. A week after she arrived, she spoke her first word, more, pointing to a bowl of stew. A month later, her laughter, clear and bright as a bell, echoed through the small cabin for the first time. And as Lily healed, so did they. The tension between Clara and May eased, replaced by a shared, protective love for the child who had become the center of their world. They fell back into a new rhythm, one that now included a third, smaller beat. They were a family. The sight was an ordinary one, yet radical in its quiet defiance. The three of them sitting at the table for dinner, the lamplight casting a warm glow on their faces. One evening, as the prairie wind howled outside, May told a ghost story about a one-eyed miner, her voice low and dramatic, making Lily squeal with delighted fear and bury her face in Clara's side. Clara looked across the table at May, and their eyes met. In that moment, the fear was gone, replaced by a simple, profound affection. The confession came on a night when the moon was full and white, bathing the hills in an ethereal, silver light. Lily was fast asleep inside, her breathing soft and even. Clara and May sat on the small porch steps. A jug of corn liquor passed between them. The night was vast and silent, the kind of silence that invited truth. They drank without speaking for a while, watching the stars emerge in the dark velvet of the sky. It was Clara who finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "I used to lie awake at my husband's house," she began, staring out at the moon-drenched landscape. "And I would think about how empty I was, how useless. I believed it. I believed God had made me flawed, and that I was being punished. I thought no one could ever love someone like me." She took a ragged breath. "A broken thing." May was silent for a long moment. She took the jug from Clara's hand and set it down. Then she turned, her face half in shadow, half in moonlight. Her expression was achingly tender. "I watched my husband die," May said, her voice low and rough with emotion. "And when he was gone, I thought the part of me that could feel anything had died with him. This town, these people, they expect a widow to just fade away, to become a ghost. And I was doing it. Then you came." She reached out, her calloused fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind Clara's ear. "I don't want anyone else but you, Clara." The words hung in the cool night air, simple, honest, and more powerful than any vow. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She leaned forward, and this time, when their lips met, there was no hesitation, no fear. It was a kiss that was slow and deep and sure. A kiss that tasted of corn liquor and salt and years of unspoken loneliness. It was a kiss of acceptance. May led her by the hand back inside, into the warm, flickering light of the hearth. The fire danced, casting long shadows on the walls. They stood before it, their hands still clasped, their hearts beating a frantic, synchronous rhythm. This was uncharted territory, a world for which they had no words, no rules. There was only the truth of this feeling, this powerful current that flowed between them. Slowly, tenderly, May began to unbutton Clara's dress, her fingers brushing against the pulse that hammered at the base of her throat. Clara trembled, but it was not with fear. It was with a lifetime of pent-up longing, of being told she was worthless, of believing she was unlovable. As the dress pooled at her feet, it felt as though she were shedding more than just fabric. She was shedding the shame, the hurt, the identity of the barren wife. May's hands moved over Clara's skin, not with rough demand, but with a gentle, questioning reverence. And Clara, in turn, reached for May, her own hands unlacing the ties of May's rough work shirt, discovering the soft, warm skin beneath. They held each other, a long, desperate embrace that was about so much more than desire. It was about comfort. It was about salvation. It was the profound, soul-deep relief of two people who had thought themselves utterly alone, finally finding home in one another. They sank to the bearskin rug before the fire, their bodies moving together in a dance of discovery, a raw and beautiful expression of a love that defied all names. It was a reclamation of the life and feeling that had been stolen from them both. Later, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, the firelight playing over their skin, Clara rested her head on May's shoulder. The cabin was quiet, safe. The world and its cruel judgments were miles away. She felt a wholeness she had never known, a sense of worth that bloomed from within. She turned her head, her lips brushing against May's skin, and whispered the question that lay at the very heart of her brokenness. "I'm not useless anymore, am I?" May didn't answer with words. She couldn't. A choked sob broke from her throat, and she pulled Clara tighter against her, her arms wrapping around her as if she could physically absorb all the pain Clara had ever felt. She held her, rocking her gently, and just wept, tears of sorrow for what had been, tears of fierce, protective love for what now was, tears that washed away the last vestiges of shame and gave Clara the only answer she would ever need. The following morning, the light that filtered into the cabin seemed softer, the air less heavy. They sat at the small table with bowls of oatmeal between them, the silence a stark contrast to the charged quiet of the weeks before. It was not an empty silence. It was a space filled with a new, settled understanding. They did not speak of the night before, of the monumental shift that had occurred on the bearskin rug in the firelight. There were no words for it. But when Clara reached for the jug of milk, her hand brushed May's, and neither pulled away. Their eyes met across the table, and in May's gaze, Clara saw not a trace of regret or fear, only a deep, steady warmth that settled the last of her anxieties. She was no longer a guest, a charity case. She was home. But a home built on the fringes of a town like Redemption is a fragile thing. Their newfound peace was contained within the cabin's walls. Outside, The world remained as harsh as ever. The whispers in town, once born of simple disapproval, now took on a sharper, more vicious edge. Clara's past as a returned bride and May's status as a reclusive widow were woven together into a tapestry of ugly speculation. They were outcasts, unnatural women, and the town watched them with a prurient, hostile curiosity. The hostility took on a face and a voice one market day. A man named Silas Blackwood, a brutish rancher with a thick neck and a reputation for cruelty, had tried to court May after her husband's death. He saw her land and her solitude as commodities to be claimed, and her consistent, cold rejections had curdled his pride into a festering resentment. He saw them near the blacksmith's, examining a set of new horseshoes. "Well, May," Blackwood boomed, stepping in front of them and blocking their path. His eyes, small and piggy, roamed over Clara with insolent appraisal. "I see you finally found yourself some company, though I figured you for better taste than another man's damaged goods." Clara flinched, the insult landing like a physical blow. Before she could retreat into her shell of shame, May stepped slightly in front of her, a silent, protective shield. "We have no business with you. Silas, step aside." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "No business. Seems to me you've set up a cozy little business of your own up on that hill. Must get lonely. 2 women all by themselves." He winked, a greasy, suggestive gesture. "If you ever want a real man to remind you what you're for, you know where to find me." That was the line. Something in May snapped. The quiet, enduring widow disappeared, replaced by a woman forged in the fire of loss and injustice, with a speed that belied her age. She lunged forward and shoved Blackwood hard in the chest. He was a large man, but the force of her fury took him by surprise. He stumbled backward, tripping over a loose stone and landing with a heavy thud in the dusty street. A collective gasp went through the small crowd that had gathered. Blackwood's face turned a mottled purple with rage and humiliation. He scrambled to his feet, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip, but stopped when the town marshal, a man named Thompson with a drooping mustache and lazy eyes, finally intervened. Now, May, that's enough," the marshal said, his tone one of weary condescension. He didn't even look at Blackwood. His admonishment was aimed entirely at her. "We can't have ladies causing brawls in the street." "He insulted us," May said, her voice shaking with rage, her hands clenched into fists. "Words are just words," Thompson dismissed. "But laying hands on a man, that's a disturbance. I'll have to fine you if there's any more trouble. Now, you and the girl best get on home where you belong." The injustice of it was a bitter pill. Blackwood was the aggressor, yet May was the one threatened. The law, like everything else in this town, belonged to the men. May stared at the marshal, her eyes blazing, but she knew it was a fight she could not win. She grabbed Clara's hand, her grip like iron, and pulled her away, the mocking laughter of Silas Blackwood following them all the way back to the cabin. The incident poisoned their sanctuary. The threat of the fine, though small, represented a much larger danger. They were vulnerable, and their quiet life was an affront to the town's rigid order. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the sound of Lily's soft breathing and May's restless turning. The shame she felt was no longer for herself, but for the trouble she had brought to May's door. She was the damaged goods, the source of the gossip, the reason for the confrontation. She was a burden, and the thought was unbearable. The next morning, she made her decision. "I need to find work," she announced, her voice quiet but firm. May looked up from the stove, her face drawn. "We have enough?" "No," Clara insisted, meeting her gaze. "The marshal threatened you with a fine. Silas Blackwood will not leave us be. The whispers, they're because of me. I need to earn my keep. I need to help." Her eyes pleaded for understanding. "There's a large ranch, the Bar T, a day's ride west of here. They're always in need of laundresses and cooks for the hands. I can go there. I'll send money back." "Clara, no," May said, her voice sharp with alarm. "You can't. Those places—" "I'll be fine," Clara lied, her heart aching at the thought of leaving. "It's the only way, to give them less to talk about, to help you. Please, May, let me do this." The argument was short and painful. May saw the unyielding determination in Clara's eyes, the same determination May herself possessed. It was a decision born of love and a desperate need for self-worth. In the end, May relented, her heart heavy with a terrible foreboding. The farewell was a study in restraint. May drove her in the old buckboard wagon to the crossroads where the ranch trail began. Lily, confused by the tense atmosphere, sat between them, clinging to Clara's hand. They barely spoke on the ride, the creak of the wagon wheels and the plodding of the old horse filling the silence. When they reached the turnoff, May pulled the horse to a stop. The vast, empty prairie stretched out before them. "You'll write," May said. It was not a question. "I will," Clara promised, her throat tight. She hugged Lily fiercely, then turned to May. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, 1,000 unspeakable things passing between them, love, fear, a desperate plea to stay safe. Clara reached out, and May's hand enveloped hers, their fingers lacing together in a grip that was both an anchor and a farewell. Then Clara let go, climbed down from the wagon, and with her small bundle of belongings, started walking west without looking back, because she knew if she did, she would never be able to leave. The Bar T Ranch was a harsh, masculine world of sweat, dust, and unending labor. Clara was assigned to the laundry, a sweltering shed behind the main bunkhouse, from sunup to sundown. She scrubbed filthy shirts and long johns on a washboard until her knuckles were raw, her arms aching with a deep, burning fatigue. The ranch hands were a rough, crude lot. They treated her with a dismissive contempt, seeing her as little more than a pair of hands to serve them. She endured their leering glances and coarse jokes, focusing on the image of May's face, on the feel of Lily's small hand in hers. She was doing this for them. The thought was her only shield. For a few weeks, her anonymity held. Then, one evening, as she was hanging the last of the wet laundry in the fading light, a man approached her. He was one of the newer hands, a lanky drifter named Jed with shifty, clever eyes. "I know you," he said, his voice a low drawl. He leaned against a post, blocking her way. Clara's blood ran cold. "I don't think so." "Oh, I think so," he insisted, a sly grin spreading across his face. "You're the one from Redemption. The bride Jebediah Miller returned. Said you were barren, useless." He savored the word. "I was there that day at the way station." A wave of pure terror washed over her. She tried to push past him, but he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Now, hold on," he hissed, his face close to hers, his breath smelling of cheap whiskey. "A woman like you, all alone out here, and that widow you're staying with. People are talking, saying strange things." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, threatening whisper. "Here's how it is. You're going to be nice to me. You're going to let me visit you in that little room of yours. You do that, and your secret's safe. You don't, well, I might just take a ride back to Redemption. Tell everyone what I've seen. Tell them what kind of unnatural life you and that widow are living. Imagine the shame that would bring down on her." The threat was not against her. It was against May. It was a knife aimed directly at the heart of the life she had sacrificed everything to protect. In that moment, the timid, shamed Clara who had been cast out by her family died. A new woman, fierce and protective as a cornered wolf, was born. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. Her free hand shot out and grabbed the heavy wooden pin she used to prop the clothesline. With a guttural cry of pure rage, she swung it with all her might, cracking it against the side of Jed's head. He grunted in pain and surprise. his grip on her arm loosening. It wasn't enough. He lunged for her again, and in the desperate struggle, his hand fumbled for the skinning knife on his belt. The blade flashed in the twilight. Clara threw her arm up to defend herself, and a searing, white-hot pain shot from her forearm to her shoulder. She saw the blood, dark and shocking against the sleeve of her dress. The sight and the pain galvanized her. She shoved him back with a strength she didn't know she possessed, and then she ran. She fled the laundry shed, past the surprised shouts of the other men, and out into the vast, darkening plains. She didn't know where she was going, only what she was running from, and what she was running toward, wounded and bleeding, with the sounds of pursuit fading behind her. She ran into the night, her one and only thought a desperate prayer, *May*. The prairie was a merciless, open palm, and Clara was an ant crawling across it. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed. Then she stumbled on, driven by a fear that was colder and sharper than the wind that rose with the setting sun. The pain in her arm was a hot, insistent throb, the blood stiffening the sleeve of her dress into a brittle shell. Night fell not as a gentle blanket, but as a suffocating shroud. And with it came the storm. Rain began to fall, first as a cold drizzle, then as a relentless, driving downpour. The wind howled, a mournful cry that seemed to mock her solitude. Lightning bleached the world white for a terrifying second, revealing the endless, featureless expanse of grass and sky, then plunged her back into a disorienting blackness. Thunder cracked overhead like the sky itself was breaking apart. She had no sense of direction, only a blind, desperate faith that she was heading east, back towards the one point of light in her world. She walked all through the night and into the next day, a wraith-like figure staggering through the deluge. Hunger gnawed at her, and a chill had settled deep into her bones, but she didn't stop. The image of May's face, the threat Jed had made against her, against their life, was the fuel that burned away her exhaustion. She was no longer just running from a monster. She was running toward her salvation. It was near dusk on the second day when she finally saw it through the sheets of rain, the faint, familiar shape of the hills that cradled the town of Redemption. A new surge of energy, born of pure relief, flooded her veins. She left the open plains and stumbled onto the muddy track that led to the edge of town, a ghost returning to her haunting grounds. She didn't look at the shuttered windows or the closed doors of the town. Her eyes were fixed on the small cabin on the hill, a single plume of smoke rising from its chimney, a beacon in the storm. Each step up the path was an agony. Mud sucked at her boots, and her vision swam. By the time she reached the rough-hewn wooden door, she was swaying on her feet, held up only by the last vestiges of her will. She raised a trembling, mud-caked hand and knocked, the sound barely audible over the roar of the wind and rain. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a bolt was drawn, and the door swung open. May stood there, her face illuminated by the warm lamplight from within. Her eyes widened, first in confusion, then in utter shock and horror as she took in the apparition before her. Clara, soaked to the bone, her face pale and gaunt, her dress torn and stained with mud and blood. "Clara," May's voice was a strangled whisper. Clara's strength gave out. The world tilted and went dark at the edges. She pitched forward, and with a cry, May caught her, her strong arms wrapping around Clara's collapsing form, pulling her out of the storm and into the sanctuary of the cabin. May kicked the door shut against the raging wind and held Clara as if she were a precious, shattered thing, her body trembling with a force that had nothing to do with the cold. She wasn't just holding her, she was anchoring her, refusing to ever let her go again. "Oh God, child, what happened to you?" May murmured, her voice thick with tears as she half carried, half dragged Clara to the fire. It was then she saw the crude, bloody gash on Clara's forearm. A fierce, protective anger flared in her eyes. She laid Clara gently on the bearskin rug, her movements suddenly urgent and efficient. She worked quickly, stripping away the wet, ruined dress and wrapping Clara in a thick wool blanket. She brought a basin of warm water and gently, painstakingly, cleaned the dirt from the wound. Clara was shivering, barely conscious, but she was aware of the tenderness in May's touch, the absolute focus in her eyes. May's hands were no longer just strong and capable. They were a source of profound comfort, a language of care that went deeper than words. As she worked, binding the arm with clean strips of linen, the tears she had been holding back began to fall, splashing onto Clara's skin. "I never should have let you go," May whispered, her voice cracking with regret. "I was a fool, a coward." She looked at Clara, her eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty. "I was so afraid of this feeling, Clara, of what it meant. What people would say. I was afraid of losing what little I had left. So I let you walk away, right into the jaws of the world I was trying to hide from. It was my fear that sent you there." Clara, drifting in a haze of pain and exhaustion, reached out with her good hand and weakly clutched May's arm. Her own eyes fluttered open, clear and lucid for the first time since she'd arrived. "It wasn't your fault," she rasped, her voice thin but steady. "I had to go, but I was wrong." She took a breath, gathering her strength. "I'm not running anymore. May, I want to be here, with you, even if it means living in the shadows, even if the whole world is against us. I don't care, as long as I have you." Her confession was a vow, a declaration of a love that had been tested by fire and blood and had emerged unbreakable. May looked down at her, at this woman who had fought and bled to return to her, and the last of her own fear washed away, replaced by a love so fierce and absolute it was an undeniable truth. She leaned down and kissed Clara, a kiss that was not about passion, but about sealing a promise. Later, after May had spoon-fed her warm broth and settled her into the bed, she did not leave her side. As the storm raged on outside, a different kind of healing began within the walls of the cabin. There was no desperate, passionate discovery this time. Their coming together was a slow, deliberate act of reclamation. It was an affirmation of trust, a conscious choice made not out of loneliness, but out of a profound and certain love. It was in the gentle, unhurried way May's hands traced the lines of Clara's face, memorizing her as if for the first time. It was in the soft, lingering kisses that spoke of comfort and homecoming. It was in the strength of Clara's embrace, a silent promise that she would never leave again. The warmth of their skin, the steady rhythm of their breathing, the feeling of being utterly seen and completely safe in another's arms. It was a quiet, sacred ceremony of two souls forging a single, unbreakable bond. They were not hiding from the world. They were creating their own, a world founded on the radical belief that they were, in fact, enough. The morning after the storm, the world was washed clean. Sunlight streamed into the cabin, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A sense of quiet resolve had settled over them, as they sat at the table with Lily, who chattered happily between them. A silent decision passed from May to Clara and back again. "We need more room," May said, her voice matter-of-fact as she looked around the small cabin. Clara met her gaze, a slow smile spreading across her face. "And a place for apple trees, on the south-facing slope." It was settled. They were no longer just surviving. They were building. That very week, they began. May, with her knowledge of woodcraft, showed Clara how to fell a small pine and strip its bark, together. They learned to notch the logs, their movements finding a shared rhythm. It was back-breaking work, but they attacked it with a joyful determination. Lily helped, carrying small branches and bringing them cups of water, a vital part of their small construction crew. They mixed mud and straw with their bare hands, laughing as they plastered it into the gaps between the logs of the new room they were adding to the cabin. They worked from sunup to sundown, their bodies growing stronger, their hands becoming more calloused. They were not just building a room. They were building a fortress, a physical manifestation of their commitment. They planted the apple saplings, their roots digging deep into the red earth, a defiant statement that they were here to stay. They were Clara, May, and Lily, a family, a small, sturdy shelter of their own making, standing resilient and hopeful in the heart of the wild, unforgiving West. Their fragile peace, built with their own hands, was not destined to last. The world they had tried to keep at bay came for them in the form of the law. One afternoon, as Clara was teaching Lily how to identify bird calls, a horse trotted up the path. It was Marshal Thompson. He didn't dismount. His position on the tall horse an assertion of authority. Lily, sensing the sudden tension, ran to hide behind May's skirts. "May," Thompson began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "A rider came in from the Bar T Ranch. A man named Jed. Says he was attacked a few weeks back by a woman fitting this one's description." He gestured dismissively toward Clara. "Says she fled after assaulting him with a weapon. That makes her a fugitive, and it makes you guilty of harboring one." May's face became a mask of stone. "Jed is a liar and a scoundrel. He threatened her. She was defending herself." Thompson shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference. "Not my job to sort out the truth of it. My job is to enforce the warrant. Silas Blackwood and some other concerned citizens have put up the money to have her brought in. You will hand her over, or I'll be back with deputies to take you both." He looked from May's defiant face to Clara's terrified one. "You have until noon tomorrow." With that, he wheeled his horse around and trotted away, leaving a cloud of dust and a cold, suffocating dread in his wake. Panic seized Clara. To be dragged back, to be handed over to men like Jed and Blackwood. It was a fate worse than death. "We have to run," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Tonight, we can pack what we need and just go." May took Clara's shaking hands in her own, her grip firm and grounding. "No," she said, her voice low but certain. "We have run enough. We built this home. Clara, this is our land. I will not be chased from it." She looked into Clara's eyes, a fierce, unwavering light in her own. "And I will not let them take you." The next morning, May did not wait for the marshal. She hitched the old horse to the buckboard, and the three of them, May, Clara, and Lily, who clung to Clara's neck, rode into the heart of redemption. May pulled the wagon to a stop directly in front of the marshal's office, a place where the town's most influential men, including Silas Blackwood, were often found. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of the two reclusive women making such a bold appearance. Marshal Thompson emerged from his office, a scowl on his face. "I gave you till noon. May—" "We're not here to surrender," May said, her voice ringing out in the morning air. Before the marshal could respond, Clara slid down from the wagon. She was pale, her newly healed scar a faint white line on her forearm. But she stood tall. All her life, others had spoken for her, defining her, discarding her, threatening her. Now, she would speak for herself. "My name is Clara," she began, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as she continued. She looked past the marshal, past Silas Blackwood's sneering face, and addressed the crowd, her eyes finding the faces of the townswomen, women who knew hardship, women who knew the casual cruelty of a world run by men. "You know me as the bride who was returned," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "You call me barren, useless. You are right, I could not give my husband a son, and for that, his family sold me. They sold me like livestock to be sent to a pleasure house for minors." A murmur went through the crowd. Some of the women shifted uncomfortably, their expressions flickering with a dawning, horrified recognition. "May saved me," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger, imbued with a righteous fury. "She gave me a home when I had none. She treated me with a kindness I had never known." Her gaze swept the crowd. "And for that, You scorn her. You whisper about her. You're Marshall, at the urging of this man. She pointed a shaking finger at a stunned Silas Blackwood. Threatens her. She took a deep breath. The truth, a fire in her belly. I went to the Bar T Ranch to earn money so we would not be a burden. A man there, Jed, recognized me. He threatened to destroy May's name, to destroy our lives. If I did not submit to him, I fought back. I would do it again. She held up her scarred arm. This is the mark of my crime. The crime of saying no. The crime of defending myself. If that makes me a fugitive, then here I am. But know this. Every whisper you have spoken against May is a lie. She is the most honorable person in this wretched town. And if you condemn her, you condemn the very idea of decency itself. She finished, breathless, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking from the effort. A profound silence fell over the square. The men looked angry, their authority challenged. But something had shifted in the women. Clara saw it in the eyes of Beatrice, the dressmaker who had refused her work. She saw it in the face of Mrs. Gable, the church guild leader, whose mouth was no longer a tight line of disapproval, but was now agape with a troubled sympathy. They, too, had been judged. They, too, had been constrained. In Clara's raw, painful confession, they heard echoes of their own silent struggles. For the first time, a woman's voice rose in their defense. She speaks the truth about Blackwood, one woman called out. He's a bully and a brute, another added. The girl has a right to defend herself. The tide was turning, and Silas Blackwood saw it. His face was a thundercloud of pure hatred. Humiliated and enraged, he shoved his way through the crowd and stormed off toward the saloon. The marshal, flustered and uncertain, simply ordered May and Clara to go home, his threat now ringing hollow. They rode back to the cabin in a state of shock, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving them exhausted but strangely hopeful. They had faced the town and had not been destroyed. For the first time, they felt a fragile sense of possibility. The retaliation came that night. They were asleep, Lily tucked safely between them, when a strange orange light began to flicker against the cabin walls. It was the smell that woke May first, the acrid, greedy smell of smoke. She threw herself out of bed and ran to the window. Her heart stopped. The woodshed, stacked high with the firewood they had spent weeks chopping for the coming winter, was engulfed in flames. "Clara, get Lily out!" May screamed, grabbing the water buckets. The fire was roaring, a hungry beast devouring the dry pine logs. The heat was so intense it was blistering the paint on the side of the cabin. May threw a bucket of water onto the flames, a useless gesture that produced little more than a hiss of steam. She turned to grab the second bucket, but a flaming beam from the shed's roof cracked and collapsed, sending a shower of sparks and embers raining down, cutting off her retreat. She was trapped between the inferno and the wall of the cabin. Clara, having bundled a terrified Lily in a blanket and carried her a safe distance away, saw May's predicament. Without a second thought, she grabbed a heavy horse blanket from the buckboard, soaked it in the water trough, and ran toward the fire. "May!" she screamed, her voice raw with terror. Holding the wet, heavy blanket in front of her like a shield, she plunged through the curtain of smoke and heat. The air was scorching, filling her lungs with fire. Embers landed on her dress and arms, searing her skin. She reached May, threw the blanket over both of them, and dragged her, coughing and choking, away from the collapsing structure. They stumbled and fell to the ground a safe distance away, gasping for air as the last of the woodshed roof caved in with a deafening roar. Lily ran to them, her small arms wrapping around both their necks, her body racked with sobs. They clung to each other, a desperate, soot-stained trio, and watched their winter's supply of warmth and security burn into the night sky. The air was cold, the ground was damp, and the ruins of the shed smoldered before them, a monument to the town's hatred. all their hard work was gone. The threat was clear. This was only the beginning. Clara cradled May's head in her lap, gently wiping the soot from her face. May was staring at the fire, her expression one of utter desolation. It was too much. The fight was too hard. But Clara would not let her surrender. She looked at the smoldering ruins, at the dark, hostile town across the valley, at the woman she loved, and her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "If I have to leave here," Clara said, her voice quiet but ringing with a strength that seemed impossible. "If they drive me out, then let me die for what I believe. Let me die here, with you, because a life without you is no life at all." May looked up, her eyes filled with tears, and saw not the broken girl she had rescued, but a woman of terrifying, beautiful courage. All the fear, all the doubt, all the years of lonely grief fell away. Clara was her home. Clara was her reason. She buried her face in Clara's lap, her shoulders shaking with a final, cathartic release of pain. "I will not let you go," May choked out, her voice thick with emotion and smoke. "I will not let them have you. Not ever again." In the quiet, ash-scented aftermath, a new kind of resolve took root in the red earth of their garden. It was May who voiced the idea, her hands still raw from fighting the fire. "There is a man of God, a Reverend Michael Theron, who has a parish 2 days' ride from here. He is not like the preachers in this town. They say he once stood on the courthouse steps and shamed a man for casting his own mother out. They say he believes God's house is a refuge for all, not a courtroom for the righteous." It was a desperate, fragile hope. That night, by the light of a single lamp, they composed a letter. Their hands, one scarred by a blade and the other by fire, worked together to guide the pen. They did not write of a love that the world had no name for. Instead, they wrote of family. They wrote of 2 women and a child who had forged a bond of care and protection in a world that sought to destroy them. They wrote of their desire to live in peace, to raise their child in a home sanctioned not by the cruel laws of men, but by a higher principle of compassion. They asked, simply and humbly, for his blessing upon their household, a spiritual recognition that they belonged together. They sent the letter with a traveling merchant, a kind man who owed May for her herbal remedies. And then they began the agonizing wait. The reply came a week later. Reverend Theron's script was firm and clear. He wrote of the hypocrisy of so-called Christians who used Scripture as a weapon. He wrote that any home built on a foundation of mutual care and protection was, in his eyes, a holy place. He would not perform a legal marriage, for he could not, but he would come. He would offer a public blessing upon their family and their home. His arrival split redemption down the middle, on the appointed Sunday. The town square became a silent battlefield. On one side, near the saloon, stood the men, Silas Blackwood, Marshall Thompson, and their ilk, their faces set in grim, scornful lines. They were the establishment, the gatekeepers of propriety, and their disapproval was a palpable force. On the other side, clustered near the mercantile, were the women. They came tentatively at first, then in a steady stream. Beatrice the dressmaker was there, as was Mrs. Gable from the church guild. They were joined by ranchers' wives in their Sunday best and miners' wives with weary, work-worn faces. They did not come with open support, not yet, but they came to bear witness, their curiosity mixed with a dawning, dangerous sense of solidarity. Reverend Theron, a tall, lean man with kind eyes that had seen too much of the world's sorrow, did not lead them to the church. Instead, he walked them to the edge of town, to a small meadow overlooking the valley, a carpet of wild primrose and Indian paintbrush blooming defiantly under the vast, open sky. This would be their chapel. May wore the simple black dress she had been married in so many years ago. It was not a symbol of mourning, but of continuity, a testament to the woman she had always been, strong and enduring. Clara wore a dress of plain white cotton, one she had painstakingly fashioned from an old, worn-out shift. It was not the dress of a virgin bride. but of a soul reborn, washed clean of the shame that had been forced upon her. She had stitched a single, resilient primrose onto the collar. They stood before the Reverend, not as a bride and groom, but as two equals, two survivors. And between them stood Lily, her small hands clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself, a living symbol of their future. They did not exchange rings. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, words that held more weight than any legal contract. "I will be your shelter from the storm," May said, her voice low and steady as she looked into Clara's eyes. "I will be your shield against the world. This home is your home. My heart is your heart, always." Clara's voice was softer, but no less certain. "I will be the warmth at your hearth," she answered, her hand tightening its grip on May's. "I will be the light in your window. Where you are, I will be. I will never leave you." The Reverend raised his hands over them. "In a world that seeks to divide and cast out," he declared, his voice carrying on the wind, "let this union be a testament to the power of love to create, to heal, and to build. What is forged in courage and compassion, let no man tear asunder. I bless this family. I bless this home. Go in peace." There was no applause, only a profound, resonant silence. The women in the meadow watched, their faces a mixture of awe and contemplation. They had just witnessed something radical and true, an act of quiet revolution that would plant a seed in the hard soil of their own lives. Their wedding night was not spent in a soft bed with new linens. It was spent on the bearskin rug before the hearth, the same place where their love had first been truly acknowledged. The fire crackled, casting a warm, dancing light on the log walls. Lily was asleep in the bed, her small body a peaceful mound under the quilt. May and Clara lay beside each other, fully clothed, their bodies tired from the emotional weight of the day. They didn't need passion. They had something more precious, peace. They talked for hours, their voices low whispers in the quiet of the night. They spoke of the future, not as a terrifying unknown, but as a path they would walk together. They spoke of Lily, of the things they would teach her, to be strong, to be kind, to be unafraid. May told stories of her first husband, not with sorrow, but with a gentle fondness for a life that had been, a life that had led her, impossibly, here. Clara spoke of her mother, a faint, dreamlike memory, and of her own quiet dreams of a garden filled with apple trees. Love was no longer a desperate, unspoken feeling. It was a choice, remade with every shared glance, every touch of a hand, every log placed on the fire. It was the conscious act of survival, the daily decision to build a life in a world that did not want them to exist. In the days that followed, they poured that decision into the earth and the wood of their home. They did not just rebuild the woodshed. They built it bigger and stronger, its new pine logs a defiant testament to their resilience. They replanted the garden, adding the apple saplings Clara had dreamed of. Their shared labor was a prayer, a meditation. The sound of their saw cutting through wood was the sound of their future taking shape. The sight of their hands, side by side in the dirt, was the image of their shared commitment. They taught Lily her letters, her small finger tracing the shapes in the dust on the floor. They lived a slow, deliberate life, marking the seasons not by the town's calendar of holidays and judgments, but by the blooming of the primrose, the ripening of the squash, and the first bite of frost on the window pane. One morning, just as the sun was cresting the eastern hills, flooding the cabin with a clean, hopeful light, Clara woke before May. She lay still, watching the woman who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. May's face, so often a mask of strength and endurance, was soft in sleep, a profound sense of gratitude, so immense it filled Clara's chest to bursting, washed over her. She leaned close, her lips brushing against May's ear, and whispered the words that were the beginning and the end of her story. "Thank you for saving me," she breathed, the words a sacred vow. I will never leave again. A year passes not in the turning of a calendar page, but in the slow, deliberate rhythm of the seasons. The snows of winter melted, the wild primroses of spring bloomed and faded, and the fierce sun of summer ripened the apples on the young trees Clara and May had planted. The town of Redemption, too, underwent a quiet, almost imperceptible thaw. The seed of courage Clara had planted with her public confession had not died in the hard soil. It had taken root. It began with whispers, but of a different kind. A wife, her face bruised for the third time in a month, was seen leaving her husband's house with her children, walking not in shame, but with her head held high, to stay with her sister. Another woman, whose husband had gambled away their winter provisions, refused to be silent, enlisting the help of Beatrice, the dressmaker, to set up a system of bartering among the women for food and mending. Cutting the men out of the transaction entirely, a small, unnamed, unacknowledged society began to form, a network of shared glances, cups of coffee, and helping hands. It was a silent, resilient web of support, and its center, its anchor, was the small cabin on the hill. Life there had found its own beautiful, enduring rhythm. The new room they had built became Clara's sewing workshop. A simple, hand-painted sign near their path read, "C. Miller, Mending and Seamstress Work." Women from town, and even from outlying ranches, began to bring her their torn dresses and their children's worn-out trousers. They came for her neat stitches, but they stayed for the quiet, non-judgmental peace of her workshop, for the cup of chamomile tea May would offer them. Clara, once the town's most shamed outcast, had become its most trusted confidant. May, in turn, had found a new purpose. She began teaching the children of the town who could not afford a formal schoolmaster. 3 days a week, a small, mismatched group of boys and girls would gather in her garden, and she would teach them to read from an old, worn Bible and to do sums with chalk on a piece of slate. She was stern but patient, her lessons punctuated by the cawing of crows and the smell of baking bread. And Lily thrived. She grew like a strong, healthy weed, her legs long and sturdy from chasing chickens, her hair a thick, black curtain that fell down her back. Her laughter was the constant music of the cabin. She had May's resilience and Clara's gentle heart. She was the living, breathing proof of their love, a flower blooming in the most unlikely of gardens. The old hatred, however, had not vanished entirely. It had merely festered in the shadows. One afternoon, as May was dismissing her students, Silas Blackwood rode up the path. He had been drinking, and his face was bloated and red with a year's worth of resentment. "Still playing house, are we?" he sneered, his eyes roaming over the children as if they were vermin. "Corrupting the youth of this town with your unnatural ways." Before May could even respond, the mother of one of her students, a tough woman named Sarah who had come to fetch her son, stepped forward. "There's nothing corrupt here, Silas, except the whiskey on your breath," she said, her voice sharp as flint. "May is doing this town a service you're too blind and drunk to see. Now ride on before you frighten the children." Blackwood, taken aback at being challenged by a woman, turned his fury on her. "You'd best watch your mouth, woman." At that moment, 2 ranchers who had been passing on the main track below, having heard the commotion, reined in their horses. One of them was a man whose wife was a regular customer of Clara's. "Is there a problem here? Sarah!" he called out, his hand resting casually on his saddle horn, near his holstered pistol. The balance of power had shifted. It was no longer 2 lone women against a hostile world. It was Silas Blackwood, a drunken bully, against a community that was slowly, painstakingly learning to protect its own. Blackwood looked from the ranchers' hard faces to Sarah's defiant one, and then to May, who stood on her porch, silent and unmovable as an old oak tree, defeated. He spat on the ground, yanked his horse's reins, and galloped away in a cloud of impotent fury. Justice, it turned out, wasn't always delivered by a marshal's badge or a judge's gavel. Sometimes, It was delivered by a quiet, collective turning of the back. That evening, as the sun began to set, Clara sat at her small writing desk. She was composing a letter. It was addressed to a young woman in a town 100 miles away, a woman whose story she had heard from a traveling merchant. The woman had been widowed, left with 2 small children, and her late husband's family was trying to take her land. Asterisk, I do not know you, Clara wrote, her pen scratching softly in the quiet room. Asterisk, but I know your story. I know what it is to be told you have no value, no place. If you are in need of a refuge, there is a home here. There is work for your hands and food for your table. You will not be a burden. You will be family. She sealed the letter, a quiet prayer for its safe passage. She had been the one rescued. Now, she was the one building the ark. The final scene of the day was always the same, a ritual as sacred as any church service. The 3 of them gathered around the small wooden table for supper. Tonight, it was a simple meal of chicken and dumplings, but in the warm, flickering glow of the tallow candle, it felt like a feast. Lily was telling a long, rambling story about a rabbit who had outsmarted a coyote, her voice full of childish drama. The sound of her laughter filled the small cabin, spilling out the open window into the vast, encroaching twilight. Clara watched her, her heart so full it felt as though it might break. She looked across the table at May, whose face was softened by the candlelight. The lines of worry and sorrow smoothed away, replaced by a deep, quiet contentment. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance was a universe of understanding, a history of pain overcome, and a promise of a future they had built with their own hands. May reached across the table and placed her hand over Clara's. Her touch was warm, her skin familiar and comforting. You were never useless. Clara, May said, her voice low and thick with an emotion that had taken a lifetime to earn. You are the reason I am still alive. The words were the most profound absolution Clara had ever known. They healed the last, deepest wound in her soul. She didn't need to answer with words. She leaned across the table and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to May's weathered cheek. It was a kiss of gratitude, of partnership, of a love that had proven stronger than shame, stronger than fire, stronger than the world. Night fell on the high plains, a vast, dark ocean of silence dotted with the cold, distant light of the stars. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the lonely cry of a coyote. The Wild West was a place of immense, untamed beauty and profound, unforgiving darkness. But inside the small log cabin on the hill, a candle burned brightly, a tiny, defiant pinprick of warmth, and its light, against all odds, held steady through the long, dark night. Thank you for listening to our story around the campfire. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and connect with your fellow travelers. If you enjoyed this tale, we invite you to subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts with us.